Thanks for joining us again at the What's Next Longevity Innovation Summit. I'm Fred Fishkin, Mary's co-host for the What's Next Living Longer, Better, Smarter podcast series. Our next panel is titled Angels and Family Offices, Funding Disease Solutions and Technologies that Impact Longevity, a Perfect Fit. Our moderator will be Dennis Ford of Life Science Nation, and on the panel are Rick Berenson with Thermalin, Human Lau from Broadview Ventures, and Mel Barski from the Center of Aging and Brain Health Innovation. Here's Mary with more.
Well, I'm thrilled to have this panel here today because the role that angels and seed offices and family offices and social impact funds can play in the next generation of funding companies is critically important. And I'm so delighted to turn this over to Dennis, who for the first time we have this panel at the Washington Longevity Summit. So Dennis, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the founder of Life Science Nation, and I'm also the creator of a conference called Redefining Early Stage Investments, better known in the industry as the RESI Conference. And we put together early stage companies from across the world with early stage investors across the domains of drugs, devices, diagnostics, and digital health. And so I'll be moderating this panel today, and I'd like to start with our introductions. And Yuman, could you please say a few words about yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for having me. So hello, everyone. My name is Human Lau, and I'm a principal at Broadview Ventures, which is an early stage investment fund that's based out of Boston. So a little bit about Broadview. We are the direct investment arm of the Leduc Family Trust. So we are a family office. And we are a early stage seed Series A investor in the cardiovascular disease space. And the way we define cardiovascular disease is actually quite broad. So that includes heart disorders, peripheral vascular diseases, any risk factors that contribute to cardiovascular disease. So for example, type 2 diabetes, obesity is part of our mandate. And last but not least, we also consider underlying pathways that contribute to cardiovascular disease, such as fibrosis. That's part of our mandate as well. In terms of how we invest, we're technology agnostic, so we consider both therapeutics as well as medical devices, as well as diagnostics as part of our focus. And since our inception in 2009, we have invested in over 40 companies. So we're very familiar and have a lot of expertise in the cardiovascular space.
Thank you very much, Yuman. And now I'd like to go to Mel.
Thank you, Dennis. My name is Mel Barski, and I work at the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation based out of Toronto, Canada. CABI, our acronym, is a solution accelerator dedicated to driving innovation in the aging and brain health sector. We are a unique collaboration of healthcare research, industry, not-for-profit, and government partners who have committed funding, resources, and support to advance innovations that improve the quality of life and reduce the cost of care delivery for our aging populations. We accelerate the development, the validation, commercialization, dissemination, and adoption of innovative products, services, and practices that support aging and brain health. Getting the best solutions into the hands of those who need them as quickly as possible to have the greatest impact on health and well-being, and to build a prosperous social and economic culture of innovation. We are very fortunate to have Mary Furlong as one of our founding advisors on our Global Innovation Council, our Global Innovation Advisory Council. We have over 300 projects in our portfolio that we have validated at any of our over 120 unique test site seniors locations, long-term care facilities, hospitals, universities, or community-based organizations internationally. And in just a few short years, CABI projects and programs have engaged over 100,000 older adults, caregivers, and innovators in our innovation and dissemination partners provide us with reach to millions more. Thanks for having me, Dennis.
That's great. Thank you, Mel. And now I'll go over to make sure that we've included everybody. Rick, you want to do an intro, please?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Pleasure to be here. My name is Rick Berenson. I am on the executive committee for Massachusetts Medical Angels, which is a Boston-based healthcare investing group. We have 6 meetings a year. We look at over 18 companies a year. We typically invest in 2 to 3 of those, all across the full range of healthcare startups, from diagnostics to therapeutics to devices to healthcare IT. We are made up of a group of physicians and biotech executives and others with deep experience and expertise in how to make these things work. And we think that's the real value add that we bring in doing our assessments and in working with the companies that we decide to either invest in or perhaps help along a bit before we make a decision about investing. I'm also the chief executive officer of a company called Thermalin Inc. Thermalin is developing new insulins that enable new ways of treating diabetes. For example, we have an insulin that is stable for a full year room temperature and is ultra rapid acting even at high concentration. The reason that's exciting is it lets us create a device like this. This is something we call the stamp pump. It is literally the size of a silver dollar, has enough insulin on board for a full week, and will completely manage your blood glucose for a full week, and then you'll throw it away. It's really designed to make life much easier for people who have insulin-dependent diabetes, which is a very large problem, not only in the United States, but all around the world, and of course is associated with higher incidences as people get older, particularly for type 2 diabetes. So pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rick. So I'd like to start off the questioning with Human, if I could. And I'd like you to just kind of give a synopsis of, we've been through 9 months of the epidemic. What does the funding domain, the funding landscape look like to a family office like you these days?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. It's interesting because frankly, COVID-19 hasn't really affected us as much as we thought that it would have. I think we've seen investment dollars being available, I think we often syndicate our deals, and the other venture firms that we work with, they have remained committed to funding the deals that we have been working on. And we frankly hasn't seen any, major disruption. Now, I mean, that said, some of these funding deals that, that was initiated prior to COVID-19 pandemic. So now moving forward, if that changes or not, I think that remains to question. So I think that there are some open questions around that. But I think I'll also mention just a couple points about just broader cardiovascular disease funding in general. I think there is a general broader trend where people are moving a little further away from traditional cardiovascular type programs, the big programs with large clinical trials with thousands of patients. So I think there's less appetite for that. But I think we've seen interest remaining high, given that it's well known that there's still high unmet need in the space. There is interest in novel technologies, companies that come up with ways, for example, biomarkers to select specific patient populations. So there is still tremendous interest in those types of technologies and companies that are pursuing solutions and therapeutics and medical devices in the cardiovascular disease space.
Thank you very much, Human. Quick question. So are you pulling the trigger in the last 9 months on any investments?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, within Broadview, we have closed on 2 deals in the past 9 months. I think the one thing that I'll say that some of these deals were initiated prior to COVID-19, but we haven't seen any of our syndicates shifting or anyone pulling out of a deal. So I think different parties, all the other parties remain committed on moving forward.
That's great. Thank you, Rick. So tell me, Mass Medical Angels, what are you seeing from your perspective? Is it business as usual?
Well, it's been a real change in process for us because typically we've done a lot of in-person meetings, and of course we haven't done any of those since last February. We've been learning how to use Zoom effectively. It's very interesting because unlike, venture funds certainly have multiple partners to consider, but an opt-in angel group like ours is much more like a true hydra. We have many, many individual heads, all of whom need to come together in order to be able to build consensus around an investment. So we have a process with committees that are formed on an ad hoc basis to assess and due diligence on companies that have made it past initial screening. And all of that seems to be working reasonably smoothly, but there's been some adaptation.
Great. So Mel, what's on your radar screen as far as opportunity and technology assets? What are you seeing during the epidemic here?
Yeah, well, similar to my colleagues here, we've recently been helping our portfolio companies pivot and have had new calls for innovation, helping address the COVID-19 pandemic specifically. Many of our portfolio companies' solutions help address issues such as social isolation for older adults, telehealth, and helping older adults age at home or in the setting of their choice longer. These are issues that existed before the pandemic, but are heavily amplified by the pandemic, and we believe will remain a growing opportunity and growing opportunities long after COVID. The era of age tech is also growing as a percentage of older adults, and the absolute number of populations from countries around the world continues to grow as baby boomers enter their senior years. The number of people living with dementia increases, and the increasing need for caregivers. So this is an area that we believe is still ripe for disruption, and lots of opportunities exist here.
So that's interesting. You're the first person to turn me on to my new word, age tech. Thank you for that. And it also sounds like monitoring is really one of the key applications. So what kind of monitoring applications are surfacing that you see? Could you give me an example?
Programs we're using, there's a few programs in our portfolio today that are looking for early detection tools for dementia, so that as you're seeing some pharma companies coming out now with potential drugs that might slow down the progression of dementia. So there's a number of companies like ReadySpec is one in our portfolio, which looks at amyloid deposits on the back of your retina as an early predictor as to whether you're going to develop dementia later in your life. So can we start therapies earlier? And there's monitoring devices in people's homes or long-term care facilities, such as falls detection tools and other tools. We have a company called Curiauto, which monitors, it's like a bed mattress that uses AI and has sensors in the bed mattress that can help prevent pressure ulcers and pressure sores, and can help inform caregivers when to turn the person, rotate them, can tell if there's moisture or other things. There's all kinds of technology that we can use to monitor different aspects of helping keep people healthier and improve quality of life.
That's great. Yuman, just to get back to you for a second, you said you're still very active with your theme of cardio. Can you tell me about your partner network, and are they in lockstep with you?
Yes, I would say so. I think, there is a lot of interest in the space. And as I've mentioned earlier, I think, the attention is turned towards more novel technologies. I think gene therapies, for example, is quite the exciting space these days. I think biomarker selected patient population or even orphan diseases where you have a monogenic disease where you can efficiently target and then avoid a lot of the pitfalls that we see in traditional cardiovascular disease space, where you have to run large trials. So if you can properly define a patient population through whatever technique or method that you have, genetic or otherwise, you're able to bypass a lot of that. And I think the other way to think about this is it's almost we're moving towards a more oncology type model, more smaller trials, quicker data readout, earlier data readout, so you can sort of have a smaller trial and quicker to approval.
So everybody's the new theory these days for your startup company is lean lean company, and now we can get into clinical trials, lean clinical trials.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's harder. For example, there are some diseases that are harder to do. For example, atherosclerosis is still an area that we still struggle with when it comes to clinical trial design, because it's mostly, for a prevention type trial. You still struggle with those issues because these are diseases that take a long time to manifest itself. So, sometimes it's helpful. For example, a lot of companies now are going after hypercholesterolemia, familial hypercholesterolemia as a first proof of concept, because it's severe. It's a well-defined patient population as a sort of a entree point to get into those disease areas. But certainly that's the trend where companies are heading, and where I think a lot of investors are looking towards. But there's still work to be done.
Great. So, we're going to switch topics a little bit about so we can get some of your insights to help the technology assets, the startup companies that surface. And Rick, can you give some guidance to the folks who are startup technology entrepreneurs or fundraising CEOs? How do they approach the angel organization like yours? And is there anything that you've learned over the years that you'd like to pass along?
Well, I think a couple of things. The first is that it's really critical for an entrepreneur to get into the shoes of the investor and to think like the investor. And so what you need to be able to articulate clearly is what the investor's proposition, the investment proposition is for the investor. How are they going to make their money back? It's great if you've got a big idea, but if you haven't figured out how you're going to turn that into a return in a reasonable period of time for the investor, you're just not going to attract most people. You're not going to get their attention. Now, let's assume that you've got an idea that you can actually tell a good investor proposition story for. The next thing that we really care about is data. You need to show us that what you've come up with is not just a science experiment that you want to run, but actually has some support. And so there's a reasonable chance that what you're talking about is good. Now, once you get beyond those two key factors, it really breaks out depending upon what category you're in. Diagnostics have a certain set of rules, and you need to really go through the medical economics of that, because so often people fall down on that. For therapeutics, you really need to be able to have an intermediate milestone that you can get to where you're likely to get a big value uptick in the near term, because they typically take a very long time to get through the process. So it varies beyond that, but the key is the investor proposition.
That's great. So remember that you're getting money and people want to see a return on money. And number two, remember that in your particular domain, drugs, devices, diagnostics, or digital health, there's a certain amount of time. And if you're a drug, you've got to really concentrate on your milestones. And if you're a device or a diagnostic, you've got a 5 to 7 year window. So you really got to show a plan to get to profitability. That's great. Thank you. Mel, could you talk a little bit about being up in Canada, regional, but also having a more global perspective on the technology assets that you see going by your desk? And also, can you explain a little bit about what the process is to get money out of you guys?
You just talked to Mary and she twists my arm behind my back and it's a done deal. Well, it varies from a number of different sources. We have a referral network that has grown truly global over our last 5 years of being around. So we started off maybe in Canada, but through our relationships at Baycrest, Cabby sits on the campus of Baycrest Health Sciences, which is the largest sort of long-term care facility, hospital, independent living facility of its kind in Canada. And on top of that, our sister organization is the Rotman Research Institute. So between these organizations, that became a nucleus for getting a lot of partners to be aware of who Cabby is internationally. And we've developed relationships as far-reaching as some of our original funders, which were Quanta Computers out of Taiwan, most recently Sample Digital Labs out of Japan, Direct Supply in the US as a huge distribution channel, and to innovation accelerator programs such as co-funding a half a dozen companies with the Israel Innovation Authority out of, no doubt, Israel, to the Northern Health Science Alliances in the UK. So we work with groups internationally. We work with all the different regional, provincial health authorities across Canada. And that's how we sort of spread our name around to all these folks. And as we've helped companies from early stage creating a prototype to helping them do scientific validation with our researchers from Rodman Research Institute or others, through to some programs where we scale and grow them using solutions accelerators, as I mentioned before, with Berkeley Skydeck out of California. So our network's growing pretty large, and a lot of them fostered by relationships we've developed through our advisors, and especially with Mary and Mary's conferences, have really got to know a lot of the players in the industry over the last few years. And fortunately, they're hearing about us and coming to us now.
Well, that's great. I mean, you know, when your reach in Canada goes to Taiwan, Japan, UK, and Israel, all of the key technology hubs for life science, that's like really great. So what does the process take if somebody surfaces on your radar screen from one of your feeder groups, and then your evaluation process to get get them an allocation? What is the timeline
Sure.
there?
So we have different funding envelopes for different purposes, and we'll set out a call for innovation with a specific theme. Some of them are from earlier stage programs to create a proof of concept, to later stage companies looking to fund validation testing or programs to help them scale. The different programs have slightly different processes. Some of our funding envelopes are competition based. So as we put out a call, they'll apply. We vet these companies with our advisors, which include our in-house scientific officers, comprising of neuroscientists from our sister organization, the Rodman Research Institute, to the clinicians from Baycrest Health Sciences, to others out in industry, to business advisors, venture capitalists, et cetera. And we also have a seniors advisory panel to ensure that the voice of end users is taken into account in every project that we review when we do our due diligence, because we want to make sure the voice of the end users is heard in this. And we're actually in the middle of, even though our former seniors advisory panel consists of 18 people located in Toronto, we're actually about to launch a global digital platform at our upcoming CABI Summit that we do with Mary every year. We're going to do this in March. And the purpose of that is to hear the voice of older adults globally, to build greater diversity into our analysis of all of our projects that we look at, in the hope that that will translate into feedback that companies can use to further make impact globally.
Great. Thank you. So we're talking about investor fit. I'd like to turn it over to Human again with the quintessential question: technology versus team. How do you figure out what to emphasize when you're talking to an investor? What is an investor looking at when they're listening about the technology and the team? And I spend a lot of my time explaining to PhD scientist entrepreneurs, yes, the technology is great, but could you talk a little bit more about yourself and how you got here? So I'll turn it over to you on that question, Human.
Sure. I think the short answer is both are really important. So from Broadview's perspective, usually we start with the technology. That's our first focus. Because of our mission driven focus, what we care about is, how is that technology going to meet an unmet need in the space of cardiovascular disease? And what we usually do then, we dig deep into the technology, right? So for example, my background's therapeutics, so I'll just use that as an example. We want to understand why the target, what's the mechanistic rationale for that target? Is the target validated? How does that tie then into the disease pathway, the pathophysiology? And the problem that you're trying to solve, is that actually, solving a clinical unmet need? And then, based on the mechanism of action, how does that tie into the patient population that you're selecting? And fundamentally, from a clinical perspective, what is the clinical utility? Is this really going to make a big difference, or is this just incremental? So that's really how we think about it. So we really want to see the dots tie into the technology. So I think it's really important to really be able to kind of build that link. I think that's probably true, not just for us, for any other investors, because the concern is sometimes you see a lot of technologies looking for a problem to solve, and that's never, a good position to be in. So then on the question of the team, I think the team is critical, but I think there is some flexibility in the team in that, if we feel that the team is maybe lacking, that can always be augmented. And then when we say team, we don't necessarily look for a full management team. I think sometimes more often than not, we have a founder, maybe a CEO. But I think what we're looking for is, do they have, or are they looking to build a group of clinical advisors, for example, external consultants that can come in and step in with the expertise that they don't have. So I think that's, and then we usually see ourselves playing a role in, I think that's one of the values that Broadview will bring in because of our KOL network, of our industry network. So we actually can help the company build that. So we don't necessarily say that, well, okay, this team, they don't have the right team, therefore we disqualify them. But it's really more of like, okay, well, what are the pieces that are lacking? What do they need, and how can we help? So there's a little bit more flexibility, but I think both components are equally important.
That's great. So then I go to data and POC, proof of concept. What's too early? What's too late?
Yeah. So for us, usually the earliest we will go is we would like to see some animal data, usually small animal data. Sometimes we do go a little earlier if it's a really exciting novel technology and we feel that we can contribute to the process. But I think more often than not, we usually look for at least some in vivo data. Ideally, even if you have larger animal data, mice, in a pig, sheep, etc. I think that's the earliest that we would go. So typically, usually the stage that we would look at would be, late preclinical, so maybe 12 to 18 months before first in human, for example. So that's the sweet spot for us.
Great, thank you. Mel, I'd like to throw something over to you. You sound like you're a unique organization. Can you tell me why you're different and how you became different and how you're going to continue to innovate?
Well, we like to think that we're different, so thank you. So I think we started in a unique way in being sort of a public-private partnership and sitting on this campus at Baycrest Health Sciences. We have access to all these unique resources. We have access to these neuroscientists at the Rotman Research Institute. We have access to these clinicians at Baycrest Health Sciences, which is a 100-year-old institution. And we have access to a couple thousand residents who live in the long-term care facilities, et cetera, that we can test some of these new products and innovations on. And when people come to be a resident of Baycrest, they don't have to opt into our validation studies. They actually have to opt out. Everybody's assumed that they're a candidate for being able to receive some of these programs. And in doing so, they get access to some of the latest technologies earlier than other people. And, in a certain way, some of this might translate into the fact that residents of Baycrest live on average, once they enter into the campus of the long-term care facility, live on average for 40 months, where in long-term care across Canada, the average life of living in long-term care is about 23 months. So it's almost double. So those kind of things are sort of unique, but the thing about CABI in that we really help companies through the complete innovation cycle, from helping researchers and frontline clinicians create a proof of concept of what they might have an idea that might work in a setting. So we really try to inspire a culture of innovation, not just on our own campus, but we have over 120 trial site partners across North America largely, and some international beyond that. And then through to later stage where we're helping these companies gain the validation that they need, to prove the scientific efficacy that it works. And then the scale and growth programs now is really where we're focusing on, and helping companies by, really providing governance to them and helping them network through to where they can gain distribution, procurement, and capital and beyond. So we think we cover a wide gambit of services and offerings.
Yeah, it really sounds like you do. So I want to quickly change. We're running a little bit out of time, but I want to get to a point. Rick, when when a company goes in front of an angel group, they're getting their first seed or trying to fill out an A. What do you look like? What does it look like to you when you're thinking of follow-on investment? How does an angel group look at giving some money and then giving some more money? How does that go?
So I think that you need to see what the financing plan is, or have some idea what the financing plan is at the time of the initial investment. And very typically, when we've made an investment, they will come back to us and present for a follow-on. It's a very straightforward, it's a much more abbreviated process because we've already done the diligence. And they will make a presentation, typically a much shorter presentation than the first time, just updating us on their progress and saying what it is they're raising and how much they'd like us to contribute. And then we will make an appropriate response. In angel groups, it's typically decision on an angel by angel basis. And so once they've made a presentation, we will help them, but largely we're guiding them through the process of connecting with each of the folks who've expressed interest to try and get to a close.
So we talk about partner ecosystem, which I think are really important. And do angels have partner ecosystems like?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We work with Broadview. We think they're a great partner. There are a bunch of both other angel groups in the Boston area and other VCs that we have strong relationships with, and will often syndicate with them. We like to think that we have a particularly good diligence process because of the depth of the expertise of our members. And that when a company comes to us, we will tend to try to take the more technically complex deals. So if it is just a straight consumer-oriented gadget that may have some health implications that may be less in our sweet spot in terms of diligence, and so we may defer that to one of the other angel groups to take the lead on. But if it's a hard science question, a complex device, that kind of thing, we like to do the diligence and then use that to help the company reach out to the other groups in the ecosystem.
Thank you. That's great, Mary. I think we've reached the end of our rope, but I'd like to give you a little bit of time just to potentially give some commentary here on the panel, and also, we're going to be doing a joint relationship together heading into next year, where we're running 4 conferences called Life Science Nation Health Tech Partnering Week. We're doing a Resi conference, an AI conference, and a Longevity Health and Innovation, and Mary has partnered with us on that conference. So I wanted to get that plug in before we ended. But Mary, I'd also like to hear a little commentary on the panel today from you.
Wonderful insights about the process that you go through as an entrepreneur, the value that the seed, the angel, the social impact investor has. And when I look at what we're doing, I see that we're developing a global ecosystem of partners, that we are together moving the whole industry faster. And of course, this is the Washington Innovation Summit, and we will have the regulators at the table because it's a lot about the business model. So if you can get reimbursement for your idea, that's really important. So I think we needed the voice, and we need people at the table at this early stage. So I find it incredibly exciting that our reach is so strong. And it's funny, when you do a hybrid or a virtual event, you have a deeper roots to touch people in Israel, in Japan, and everyone can watch the conference. And so the learnings can have a mass impact, and we're hoping to do that. So I'm very grateful for these insights. The COVID, I would say too, Dennis, has accelerated a lot of the innovation, because at the top end, the boomers are 75 in 2021 and 55 at the low end, but that's globally. But everyone's had to be learning how to use telehealth and telemedicine. And so I see bigger and bigger budget budgets for this kind of innovation, which is always music to the ear of the entrepreneur, I think. So I would say great job, great partnerships, and we're thrilled to have you all here. And I look forward to 2021 and all the parts of the globe we're going.
Well, we want to thank Dennis, Rick, Human, and Mel. Great information and congratulations on fostering all of this innovation. Lots of gratitude for our sponsors as well. And we also appreciate you being here and taking part.